Nice.
My name is Norman Carrick. I've been a beekeeper for 40-something years, and I've been a bee research scientist for 30-something years. But of relevance to what I'm going to say in a minute, for about 20 years, I worked at Rothamsted Experimental Station with my colleague Brenda Ball, who was a world authority on bee viruses, and together with her predecessor, Bill Bailey, really pioneered the study of bee viruses, in particular the relationship between viruses and the Varroa mite or whatever. So Myri has set the scene for a number of imports into this country, and the next few talks are going to look at the downsides of those imports. And I've got disease. So I suppose the first question is there any evidence that pests and diseases have entered the UK through imports? Unfortunately, the answer to that is yes, they have. And the first one, of course, is Varroa, which has already been mentioned. This remains the major threat to beekeeping worldwide. And it got to the UK, this was 33 years ago, I think now. Deadly bee rabies discovered in Devon, and these were some of the headlines from around that time. And as you can see from this MAF news release, the initial reaction was to try and set up a line across the country beyond which the Varroa mite was not supposed to pass. But beekeepers moved bees around, and of course it spread around the country. And there are a few remote places like the Scilly Isles and Colonsay in Scotland, and a few remote valleys here and there in Scotland and Wales that are Varroa free. But it's a major problem, and as you can see, within a few years, people were realising that Varroa was a real threat to the beekeeping industry. But how did it actually get here? Well, as I say, 33 years ago, it was found not so very far away from here by the Torbay beekeepers who were carrying out a demonstration of finding Varroa, and they were surprised to find it. But when the bee inspectors started looking, they found the epicentre of the outbreak was near Buckfast Abbey on Dartmoor. And you can believe whatever alternative theory, conspiracy theory, explanation for how it got there. But actually, when people started looking, they found that it wasn't only in Dartmoor. There was another outbreak in Suffolk, Felixstowe, and you can envisage that that was a swarm came in on a container or something like that. That could have been totally accidental. But actually, there was a third outbreak in Surrey. So when Varroa got to the UK, there were 3 separate outbreaks, and the one in Surrey is a complete mystery to this day. There were no known movements of bees, but nonetheless, it must have come in through imports of bees. And interestingly, when it reached Ireland some years later, it didn't turn up at an obvious place near a port. It turned up at Sligo in the west of Ireland, seemingly from an import of a colony from the UK. So Varroa definitely got here. Does Varroa matter? Yes, Varroa matters a lot. It, as you all know, feeds on the bees, but it's particularly important because it transmits a number of viruses. This is deformed wing virus. This is the most important. This is present now everywhere where Varroa is present around the world. Deformed wing virus was discovered as a laboratory curiosity at Rothamsted in the 1970s, but was not known to cause a problem until Varroa came along. And Varroa has the unfortunate effect of introducing the virus into a life stage of the bee that it doesn't naturally get in, and you get these bees with the deformed wings and the stumpy bodies which die within a few days, which is very unfortunate. But Varroa has the ability to transmit a range of viruses, and in the early days, this is a picture I took up on Dartmoor in 1992 of dead brood, and scientists in the United States helpfully invented the term parasitic mite syndrome. I know we've got a few medical people in the audience here, and a syndrome is really a collection of symptoms when you don't know what's wrong with what causes something, and it's really unhelpful because there are lots of things that can produce this parasitic mite syndrome, in particular a group of other viruses. So this is one. This is Kashmir bee virus. What was Kashmir bee virus? Well, another thing discovered as a laboratory curiosity. Dr. Bailey isolated it from samples of Apis cerana, the eastern hive bee sent from Kashmir, unsurprisingly. But it was also found quite early on that it occurred in Apis mellifera in Australia, and there it didn't seem to cause any particular problem. It sort of exists at a very low level, not thought to be a major problem. Then it was found to be present in the United States. And Bailey and Ball's work showed that Kashmir bee virus was very closely related to something called acute bee paralysis virus, which had already been observed to be really harmful to bees in association with Varroa in Central Europe, in Germany and the Netherlands and so on. So, you know, we knew that Kashmir bee virus was present in Australia, New Zealand and other places, and but we didn't think it was present in the UK, because although there hadn't been a systematic survey, for many years at Rothamsted, they collected dead bee samples and routinely analysed them for all the viruses that they knew about to produce data on the presence of viruses in apparently healthy colonies. And Kashmir bee virus didn't turn up. So we couldn't prove it, but we didn't think it was present in the UK. And then we come to a period where, for the reasons that Mari's outlined, bee farmers in the UK wanted to import packaged bees from New Zealand to make up losses caused by Varroa in the UK. We were very concerned that if Kashmir bee virus got in association with Varroa, it could cause big problems. The then Central Science Laboratory National Bee Unit carried out a risk analysis, looking at all the available data, and concluded that it wasn't a particularly big problem and that it would be okay to import bees. But the then Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, MAF, were sufficiently concerned that they commissioned us to carry out some work at Rothamsted. And so I was asked to import lots of queens from different places in New Zealand, and we did various things with them. We analysed the attendant workers, we analysed the queens, we put a whole load of them in colonies here to keep them for a couple of years, see if viruses turned up and so on. And actually we found that, yes, some of the attendant workers did carry Kashmir bee virus, but we didn't find any queens that did. That didn't prove they couldn't, but certainly, yes, it could get in through the attendant workers if they were, put in colonies. But we also did some laboratory experiments to see what happens if you put Kashmir bee virus and Varroa together. So this is a white-eyed pupa being injected with Kashmir bee virus. The pupae were then kept in an incubator, and mites were allowed to feed on them, and we were hoping that the mites would pick up the virus. And then this is one of our indoor flight rooms, and this is a small colony. We introduced we transferred the mites to newly emerged bees, marked those, put them in the colony, and every day we went around and hoovered up all the dead bees and then analysed them for viruses. And we did 3 experiments over a couple of years, and this is what happened. So this is, you start with 100% of the marked bees, and over time, the blue lines are data from published studies of how long bees ought to live in the summer and in the autumn. And this is actual data, and you can see that in particular, this is experiment 3 in the autumn. So the bees should be lasting through the winter like this dotted line, but here you get a sudden infection and most of the bees die. in a day or so, and only about 10 days after they've been introduced. So yes, Kashmir bee virus does kill bees, and it can be transmitted by Varroa mites, but this one's quite interesting. This is the same experiment, but we were looking at our marked bees here. So the marked bees all disappeared within the first month, but you can see that even at the end of the autumn, at the end of the winter, there is Kashmir bee virus in the mites and in unmarked bees. So this is showing that once you've introduced Kashmir bee virus into a colony, it can circulate and become self-sustaining. So not good, really. But then things moved on. New Zealand actually found Varroa shortly while we were doing this work, and New Zealand temporarily banned exports. And within a short time, in New Zealand, they found that in association with Varroa, Kashmir bee virus was killing colonies. So not a good thing. And then a bit later, the National Bee Unit did a much bigger survey to use their snazzy new PCR machines to look for viruses, and they found Kashmir bee virus had been in the UK. But where was it? This is the map in that paper, and there are actually two isolated points there, quite a long distance apart in the north of England. That does not suggest to be something that's been there for years and years and years. That suggests to me that these are individual imports in bees that have been imported. So moving on to another one. This is a much more impressive computer-generated picture of what this one. This is Israeli acute paralysis virus, and I'd not heard of this one until 2007, when the world was trying to understand what was going on with all the colonies in the United States that were dying from something that scientists had called colony collapse disorder. And to this day, really, the major culprit for what actually happened then, not all the things that may have been confused with colony collapse disorder, but for what was actually observed, seems to have been Israeli acute paralysis virus. And then the National Bee Unit did a random apiary survey where they did a really good, statistically valid random survey of beekeepers around England and Wales. They looked for lots of things, including genetics and so on. So there is some data on genetics. But one of the things they found was Israeli acute paralysis virus. But again, they only found it quite rarely. There wasn't a lot of it. And why do we think Kashmir bee virus and Israeli acute paralysis virus are recent introductions to the UK? That's because we now know, I said these things were closely related, we now regard those as all part of the same thing. So this is a virus complex that includes these three. They are regional variants of the same thing. So with the COVID outbreak a couple of years ago, we've become very familiar with the idea that there are regional variations of viruses, different strains of COVID that were moving around the world and so on. These are different strains of the same bee virus. Acute bee paralysis virus clearly is native to Europe and has been in the UK for a very long time. These others are exotic and have come in much more recently. And they've come in, due to imports of bees. It's really difficult to think of another explanation. So does it matter that these viruses are here now? Well, I think it does. But it's a bit difficult to say, because we come back to this unhelpful thing here. People find dead brood associated with Varroa, and they say, oh yes, it's parasitic mite syndrome. I know what it is. Well, you don't know what it is unless you analyse those. You don't know what's actually killed those bees. So I suspect that in heavily infested colonies, these exotic viruses are killing colonies, but we don't notice it because we just say, oh, it's Varroa, and we move on. But there are other viruses. This is chronic bee paralysis virus, which is this strange blobby thing. This has been in the UK for a very long time. We heard mention of Brother Adam and his buckfast bees, which he thought were resistant to this Isle of Wight disease. He thought the Isle of Wight disease was tracheal mites. Dr. Bailey really demonstrated that actually it was chronic bee paralysis virus, which was clearly very common in the UK in the early 20th century. But then data from Rothamsted showed that it became less common and people forgot about it until recently, where it's becoming a problem again, particularly among bee farmers, commercial beekeepers working on quite a large scale. So Giles Budge, who was at the bee unit that's now at Newcastle, put out this paper a couple of years ago, and he demonstrating, quite clearly that the incidence of chronic bee paralysis viruses increased in recent years. And he broke down, this is data collected by the National Bee Unit, and they broke it down from what they call the professional beekeepers, the commercial ones, and the amateur ones. And the incidence is higher in the commercial beekeepers' colonies, and in particular, it says in the paper, it's particularly higher in those that purchased queens from abroad. And it's got this really interesting map, which shows that the incidence has increased over time, as the other graph does. But what it does show is that you get this weird pattern where there's no virus here, you suddenly get this hotspot, which seems to burn itself out over a few years, and then you get another hotspot, which seems to burn itself out over a few years. Now, what's going on there? Is that a virus that's been there for, at least 100 years, natural occurrence? It doesn't really look like that. It looks a bit strange. And those are actually associated with imports of bees. Now, we know that chronic bee paralysis virus has been present in the UK for forever, seemingly. So, it's possible that this is other strains of chronic bee paralysis virus being brought in on imported bees, or the alternative explanation is that the imported bees are exposed to a different strain of chronic bee paralysis virus in the UK to the one they're used to, and they're susceptible to it. That seems the more likely explanation to me. So I think that's really good evidence that pests and diseases have been introduced into the UK in the past and are continuing to be introduced into the UK. So what have we got for the future? Well, there's two biggies on the horizon. There's the small hive beetle, native to Africa, got to the United States quite a long time ago, caused major problems, present in Australia, etc. Lovely creature, which does lovely things to your hives like this. Unfortunately, 2014, it was found in southern Italy. It was found in Sicily quite soon afterwards. They traced the movement of these colonies from Sicily back to the mainland. They destroyed these, but this is last year. It's back in Sicily again, and it's in several locations. If you recall from Maori's list, we do import lots of queens from Italy, not from this particular region where this was the centre of the queen rearing operation in southern Italy, but they're not allowed to export from here, but they do export from up here, and they do export from Sicily. Now, since this was found in Sicily, the UK government has temporarily banned imports from Sicily, but on that list that Mary showed, there is Malta, and there is a very large operation in Malta which rears queens in Sicily, and there is a suspicion that some of the ones marked as Maltese actually come from Sicily, and there's certainly a direct connection in that their material comes from there. So, not good. What's the other one? The other one's the Tropilelaps mite, again, a charming little creature that lives on the pupae, more virulent than Varroa, more destructive. We thought until recently not a problem in temperate countries because it can only live on the brood and not on the adult bees. But we got a bit complacent. We thought, oh, it's only in Southeast Asia. And while people's eye was taken off the ball, it's been spreading. It's been found in southern Russia. It's now been found in Georgia. It is in Europe. And for those of you whose geography of this area is a little bit hazy like mine, these are places where it's been for quite a long time. So this is Afghanistan, 1993. It's been spreading while people have taken their eye off the ball. and it was in Uzbekistan, 2011. 300,000 colonies a year pass from Uzbekistan to southern Russia. The beekeepers noticed that their bees were dying, but they carried on importing more bees to replace the ones that had died. And they've got Tropilalax in them. It's now in Georgia, which is here. This is Turkey. This is Ukraine. Unfortunately, some of these countries are undergoing political problems, wars, things like that, unstable governments. Their top priority is not looking for bee pests. So if we wait for official findings of these things, we may be in trouble. This is an article that a colleague of mine, Mustafa Maz from Turkey, wrote very recently, looking at the trade routes, the connections between eastern Turkey, close to Georgia, close to Russia, and the rest of Turkey through the year, and countries that are related, have strong cultural links like Bulgaria and Romania. Romania was on that list that Mario was mentioning. So there is a real risk that these two pests will take advantage of the trade routes that we have. That pointer stopped working. So really my question is it worth the risk of continuing to import bees? Well, I don't know, we can decide. I've just written an article with the same title, which will be in the next Beekeepers Quarterly, based on what I've got in this talk. So please read it. And I shall stop there and we pass on to the next downside reports with John.